everyone, and welcome back to the Just Transition Forum Asia 2024. We hope that you enjoyed your lab session earlier and the one that I attended, Lab 8. It was so inspiring to hear the work that youth advocates are doing in my own country, the Philippines. We've actually been hit by a typhoon this week, and that really just underscores the importance of all of these discussions that we've been having here at JTFA. So I know I'm not alone in feeling energized, and now that we've all been inspired over these past few days, it's on us to translate that into action. So, with this in mind, and to build on that, it's now time for our keynote address and closing panel titled Mobilizing Finance Mechanisms for Loss and Damage. This panel will be moderated by Franziska Schmidtke, Regional Director, Climate and Energy Project, FES Asia. Let's give our speakers a virtual round of applause as we now turn over to them.
Thanks a lot, Siege. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. Well, the storm that you've been mentioning is now moving towards Vietnam, so we hope that our internet connection will stay strong throughout this closing panel. Again, welcome everyone to our final and closing session of the Just Transition Forum Asia 2024. I cannot believe that we are already moving towards the end of the forum. Over the past few days, we've engaged in enriching discussions on the intersections of just transition, climate finance, and really the future of our collective efforts. In our opening panel, we emphasized the importance of adopting an inclusive approach, particularly by broadening the conversation on just transition to include climate finance and loss damage. But I think we've also all noticed how difficult it is to not think in our own silos, but to connect to others, to other perspectives. With our labs, we hope that we've been able to explore, again, diverse needs, assessments, and practices across countries and sectors. I hope you were all able to explore unique projects and their progress. And now, what we are attempting now to do with our keynote and the closing panel is that we would really like to bring multiple stakeholders, which is really the key effort that the Just Transition Forum is attempting every year. Bringing multiple stakeholders to the floor and then focusing actually on the trajectories of actually mobilizing finance mechanisms for loss and damage. So the question for the next 85 minutes will be, how can we actually work and implement the needs for an integrated approach of just transition and loss damage? This is what we're trying to address. And thank you, every one of you, for joining us for this closing session. Before we really begin to dive in, we wanted to reconnect to our opening panel. And for that, I invite our dear partner from the Climate Action Network Southeast Asia, Niti Nisanturai, again to the floor to share the key findings from our opening session. Niti, you have the floor.
Thanks, Franziska. And yeah, very briefly, these were the key findings from the opening panel session on day one. Oh, okay. The theme was financing loss and damage, multi-stakeholder perspective. The four speakers were a decade-long campaigner for loss and damage from civil society, high-level German government representative, negotiator for G77 in China, and a representative of Malaysia's second largest banking group. The first point made was that the panelists welcomed the Just Transition Forum Asia, including loss and damage, into our annual discussions on just transition. The panel focused on where the discussions are with the Loss and Damage Fund, how significant the conversation will be on the fund at Baku during COP29. It also made a call to action to civil society organizations to mobilize them on what value they can add through their lobbying and campaigning in the lead up to COP29, especially on loss and damage and the Loss and Damage Fund. And it's our great pleasure and privilege to have the actual co-chair of the Loss and Damage Fund with us here on this panel. Now, I'll just very quickly add key points from each of the speakers. Harjit Singh, the decades-long campaigner on loss and damage I was talking about, said the fund has to lay out their vision. Without a vision, you'll be satisfied with what money we have now, which isn't enough at all. The needs are in trillions of dollars. Dirk Mayer from the German Environment Ministry said, loss and damage is a part of just transition. This is the biggest challenge of our generation. To regard loss and damage as part of just transition is crucial and needs to be centered here. There is a need for an intersectoral approach to the fund and sustainability of resources mobilization. The need is high. Vice Yu, the negotiator for G77 in China, said we have an institutional arrangement, the Warsaw International Mechanism, the Santiago Network, and the Loss and Damage Fund. We now need early resources mobilization for the fund. There's a need for greater encouragement to countries to include loss and damage as a component of their nationally determined contributions, which will identify their needs and support needed. At the end of the day, this is about human lives and justice and fairness, not dollars. Historical responsibility is a part of this, and Luen Xie, the banker, said private sector funding is focused on mitigation. There's very little discussion in the private sector on providing loss and damage finance from the private sector. For loss and damage, as there's no monetary return, the one way to provide funds is through corporate social responsibility. And then she says, we already have existing solutions for climate change, many of which are cost saving. Let us invest in the known solutions, not the trendy new innovations and technologies. So that was the summary from the opening panel session. Back to you, Franziska.
Thank you so much, Nidhi, for bringing us back to really the inspiring notions that we had throughout the opening panel. I just forgot to mention one technical note. If you have any questions or comments, please share them with us in the chat box, and I will try to include them into our conversation later. But now, really, with no further delay, I'm excited to introduce our keynote speaker for this panel, Richard Sherman, as he was already also introduced by Nidhi. I mean, you just heard it. We've referenced the Loss and Damage Fund several times throughout this forum. We've discussed its decade-long preparations and the rallying efforts behind it. As Hayat emphasized, the critical questions still remain. But today we have really the privilege of hearing directly not only from an insider, but from the insider, from the co-chair of the board himself. I just quickly wanted to highlight that beyond his work in the fund, Richard Sherman is, of course, a highly respected climate expert, and we are really honored to have him here with us at the forum. I'd like to highlight that, I mean, your list of references is just a very long one, but one thing I would like to mention, you're still the substantive lead on the climate finance program of the South African NGO South North. So you're also at heart civil society voice that has come to us. I would like to mention this because I think when we talk about the Loss and Damage Fund, of course, it's a global effort, and it sometimes can feel technical and a little bit disconnected from what's going on the civil society side. So I think it's just a special value that you also have this background, and I mean, that you work ongoingly with the NGO. Richard, we are just delighted to hear your insights and assessments of the current state of the Loss and Damage Fund. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Francisco, and thank you very much to the organizers and my dear old friend Nidhi for inviting me to join your meeting. It is indeed a great honor. I also want to note that this is another shining example of the leadership of civil society in the loss and damage discussion. We would not have been here where we are right now if it wasn't for the active engagement and the lobbying and the efforts of civil society. This is just as much your victory as it is ours as the multilateral process. So I want to again extend my gratitude, as I did when we presented the report of the Transitional Committee to Dubai, to thank civil society for all your efforts, and to also thank you for the continued criticism and the critical thinking that you bring to this discussion. We are negotiators, we are board members, we are constrained most of the time in our ability to think big. We tend to be very bureaucratic in our thinking A, B, C, but it is the civil society colleagues that put us on our toes and make us respond to things. And so I think this is another the integration of loss and damage into the just transition discussion is a critical component of our work going forward. And I want to thank you for pioneering that discussion, because the just transition is so much focused on the avoiding and mitigating loss and damage, but not actually our specific role as the fund is to respond to loss and damage. And it's a sad moment when the international community has to set up a fund because it's failed to do its work. It's failed to meet the obligations to support developing countries. So in somewhat a mode, we're a bit of a crisis institution. I hope that changes. I hope we see much more action on the mitigation front and the adaptation front, and much more resilience being put as the focus. But the reality is that we have committed to serious numbers of degree changes in climate change, and we're stuck with loss and damage because we failed. And I think we should not lose sight of that. Hopefully this fund is not going to address future loss and damage, because we've done the needed actions. There's been the needed support, and again, we rely on civil society to play a role with us. I think one of the core issues, which is not really a board issue, but the broader debate is where does loss and damage finance sit into the bigger picture of climate finance? Is it climate finance or is it something else? And I don't think we've had that conversation, and we need people to really think about, is loss and damage the systemic failure of climate finance? And does it need to be decolonized as a kind of ODA type of support, a very sort of patronizing, we need to support developing countries, or do we need to actually go back to the foundational discussion on loss and damage of 30 years ago? It is about compensation. It is about reparations. We have to be rebuilding people's livelihoods. We have to be rebuilding infrastructure. We have to be rebuilding communities. And so we should not just jump very quickly to think that loss and damage is the third component of climate finance, so mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. I think that's the wrong way of approaching this. And this is really important for the fund, because we know the deal made in Paris that we wouldn't be talking about compensation and liability and reparations. But there's no ways that we cannot, as a fund, include core dimensions of reparations. Whether we call it reparations or not is another issue, but we have to be able to fund the rebuilding of livelihoods. And we had this discussion with the World Bank yesterday. Livelihood restoration is a core part of development, right? We should not necessarily lose restoration or livelihood restoration because politically developed countries don't want to take responsibility for the damage they've created. So I think we do need to continue this intellectual conversation, but it can't just be an intellectual conversation. We have to find a way in which the fund operates to include the restoration, the rehabilitation, the reconstruction dimensions as part of our funding packages that we provide to developing countries. Let me look towards some of the work of the fund as we go forward. I mean, the role of civil society in the fund is crucial. We recognize that in our governing instrument. We have a specific reference to a modality for small grants. We have specific references for community engagement forums or stakeholder engagement forums at the country regional levels. These matters will be taken up by the board, not at this current meeting at the end of this month, but in our meeting in December. We hope to also at that time conclude the package of procedures that would allow civil society to be an active participant as an observer in the board. We will conclude the work around the accreditation system. I'm not quite sure why we, as bureaucrats, are so fussy about accrediting NGOs. The fund should be open to everybody, but somehow we're stuck in a process where we somehow need to vet organizations. Again, that's just a legacy of how the UN system works. And then we would hopefully address this notion of how do stakeholders and civil society engage in the work of the fund at the country level? This is critical because I think governments need to understand how they can work better. And many governments are engaging civil society and communities in their work, but it's clearly not, from what we're hearing from the ground, is it's not working. It's not sufficient, and we need to bring a new dimension to how that works with loss and damage. And I think this is one of the core things that myself and my co-chair from France are bringing to the discussions, particularly with the World Bank. Is this is not business as usual. We're not just setting up another fund to be based in the World Bank. We're going to change the way we work. The way we work as bureaucrats or government officials, but also the way the World Bank works, and also the way in which countries work. So we look forward to continued engagement with our friends Harjit and our other colleagues on this to help us design these systems in the fund so they are actually meaningful. They can actually allow money to be channeled to the most needed, and in a manner which I hope that you are extremely critical of us, that we do it in a speech. Right? So one part of the fund work is the amount of money we get in, which is a huge challenge, but also the amount of the time we take to get the money out. So we can't afford to spend 10 years trying to raise $400 billion. We need to do this very fast and very quickly, but then the money can't sit in the trustee in Washington, D.C. It needs to move quickly to countries. And so we're having discussions right now around what would be, we got a mandate at our last board meeting as co-chairs to present a list of propositions to the board to do things differently. And the mandate of that work on the propositions was, so how do we design a country-owned bottom-up fund, right? Not a top-down institution that's set by a set of rules that tries to put 143 developing countries into the same bucket and treat them equally, because we're not the same. We have different needs. Our loss and damage context, the context you have in Asia Pacific, is very different to the context that we have in Southern Africa. And so we need to have a fund that can be specific and flexible and nimble enough to support Asia Pacific, support Latin America, support colleagues in the Middle East, and support people in Africa. Again, we're going to need your help for this. Where we are right now, I think in record time, but again, that doesn't really mean anything until we have money, and we have money out the door. But we're likely by the end of September, the hope is that we would have appointed an executive director of the fund. That person would then be in a position to start setting up the secretariat, the new dedicated independent secretariat at the World Bank, hosted at the World Bank, not part of the World Bank. By January, we've just spent the last 4 days in detailed long day negotiations with the World Bank around the arrangements to host the fund in the World Bank. We've also spent the last week dealing with the trustee arrangements and the contribution agreements. I think one of the critical messages is, where is the money from Dubai? Are those just pledges? Or actually, are we going to see that money put into the fund immediately, right? So as soon as we're able to raise the money, the other mandate that we got from our board at our last meeting was to propose how we could spend that, right? Are we going to sit, although it's only $700 plus million, are we going to wait until we have a full, complete suite of policies and procedures, or are we able to move if there's events that we need to fund immediately? Are we able to move to support those events because we have the money? And so these are fundamental questions. We hope to present a very sort of skeletal proposal at our board meeting in 2 weeks' time. But the hope is that a full proposal would be presented to the board in December. What I can tell you is that the issue of funding access for communities and civil society will be one of the, I think there are probably going to be 15 proposals made by the co-chairs. One of them would be on civil society access modality. We've heard very clearly from colleagues that you want a community access window. And so we're going to explore the options of how that would work, and given the constraints that we have with the system that we're dealing with, but it will be there. We will consult with colleagues on that proposal, and obviously once the board confirms the mandate in the governing instrument to allow for a small granting modality or community modality, we would then further consult with colleagues. So we look forward to working with Harjit and the other colleagues in CAN and all other NGOs, and also particularly working with you to bring people or civil society that we don't work with, right? So we don't necessarily work with colleagues that deal with refugees or colleagues in the migration sector. So there is actually a gap in our outreach to society, and there's an expectation that you will help us close those gaps and bring us closer to the people who are most vulnerable. So the fund essentially should be functioning and up and running and able to get money out of the door. I would say in January, assuming that the pledges are made from Dubai, which if they're not, has another political consequence for the discussions in Baku. So we would also have to then, in that context, figure out what is the easiest way to get money out of the door while we're developing our systems. And there will be, that was the other mandate that was given to us, is to present proposals on how that could work. There may not be the most palatable solutions to start funding immediately, because it's probably likely to be a suite of co-financing options, which is not great. We do not want this fund to become a fund of other funds, but it is going to be part of our work to support ongoing initiatives and existing initiatives. And following that, we would continue to develop work around, we were given a mandate in our work plan to conclude the resource mobilization approach by 2025. So that gives us a year to figure out how we raise the larger sums of money. We're thinking that in this case, we may want to look at establishing some kind of high-level panel of eminent persons to help do the resource mobilization, rather than being like an inward-looking board process where we just get board members to talk about millions. We actually, I think, need to, as part of the resource mobilization strategy or thinking about the strategy, is appoint people to do the work for us. You can go out and knock on the doors of capitals and start to raise the large sums of money. Again, even if we have large sums of money, it is really how we program it and how we support communities. So for us, and I think the board in general, this country-owned bottom-up approach is really the way of the future for us. We are going to need, as this is something, unfortunately to say, it's new for international financing institutions, which is quite a sad indictment of the institutions that are meant to support the poor people and eradicate poverty. But we're going to give it a try, and we look forward to the role of civil society in this. I think, Niti, in your summary of the first session, you spoke about the need to include loss and damage in the NDC process. This is going to be critical because it relates really to the ability to act quickly. So the more we can anticipate what the need would be, although we can't always be clear on the data of where the impacts are going to come, but if we understand what the solutions would be, we can reduce the programming and disbursement time significantly. So we understand from our discussions with the bank and other institutions that sort of the understanding and having a plan in place can reduce the disbursement time from anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks to 6 days. So we could be in a position, and we should strive to be in a position whereby an event happens, we're able to disperse money to countries within, I would say, the latest a week, right? But we don't have the luxury of going into a country after an event and doing a massive programming planning process. So we have to develop new and innovative ways of working. So that's really where we are with the fund. We are we are caught sometimes with very bureaucratic discussions, such as we spent a year trying to agree on the name of the fund. We still don't have an agreed acronym. So it is quite frustrating that we tend to get distracted by the politics of loss and damage. But we're on the right track, I hope. And we look forward to continuing our discussions with civil society and other partners. You are a core part, not just because you're included in the governing instrument, but you're also included as part of the funding arrangements. So there's the fund, and there's these things called the funding arrangements, political package from Sharm el-Sheikh, but we would expect civil society not only to play a core role in the governance of the fund and the board, but also to be an actor on the ground to support communities. There are many occasions that we know that you're more nimble and more able to respond to disasters or events and loss and damage events than governments can be, or the humanitarian system. So we will rely on you to continue to be our champions, to continue to criticize us, but also to continue to support people in developing countries dealing with loss and damage. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Francisco.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you so much for the open sharings and reflections, and thank you for your, what I understand was really a pledge also to civil society to further engage, to further criticize, but also to still engage with everyone who's working on this fund. I can see that there are already comments in the chat, and I think we will have the opportunity to address them later. But now, since we are trying to assemble a multi-stakeholder forum here, I'm pleased and I'm also very much honored to introduce His Excellency Lon Lim Thai, Secretary of the State at Cambodia's Ministry of Environment. With His Excellency's input, we will shift now from the macro level to the national level and see how Cambodia is actually managing the great need for climate finance as a developing country with high climate ambition that obviously comes with a price, with a need for sustainable climate finance. And His Excellency Lon Lim Thai has been pivotal really in driving Cambodia's climate policies and regional collaboration on adaptation and finance mechanisms. We look forward to hearing your perspective on how these finance mechanisms can be implemented in your country. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Francisca. Honorable Francisca Smith, Mr. Richard Sherman, Honorable Member of Parliament, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Today, I'm deeply honored and delighted to participate as an honorary speaker at the closing ceremony of the plenary session of Asia Forum for Climate Justice. On behalf of the Cambodian National Assembly and the Third Commission, I extend a warm welcome and heartfelt thanks to all delegates for the support, cooperation, and active participation in this important meeting. I would like to share some thoughts related to this meeting. Currently, we are in an area of loss and debate caused by the impact of climate change. The effects of climate change are spreading extensively, which we cannot control globally. The rise in sea level and climate-related disasters continue to have severe impact, as demonstrated in the sixth assessment report AR6 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC). Day by day, the changing sea level, ecosystem, and climate system are affecting livelihood, economy, and living conditions. At the 27th Conference of the Party to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change COP27 held in Egypt, governments from around the world gathered who agree of measure to establish a loss and debate fund for addressing the impact of climate change. The leaders show their commitment to responding to the crisis which we face by creating solutions for loss and damage caused by climate impact and providing support to those affected by climate change. Lawmakers and representatives must take action and advocate for law and policy to address to loss and damage caused by climate impact globally. Members of Parliament and lawmakers have a critical role in addressing the loss and damage by drafting, reviewing, and approving legislation legislation that hold government accountable for ensuring climate response are fair and responsible toward community affected by climate crisis. Budget, technology, and support must be allocated responsibly to the community impacted by climate change. New law must be adopted globally, introducing new framework for fundraising based on the principle of polar pay, which can mitigate collective impact and ensure that financial resources for loss and damage reach the affected community. Members of Parliament have a crucial role in achieving this goal by implementing effective and timely methods to address the issue. Collaboration on loss and damage caused by climate impact, along with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, call on members of parliament and lawmakers from around the world to support action on the loss and damage fund before the COP28 conference in Dubai to show the world that we collectively support this action and have a role in protecting those affected, especially the poorest who suffer the most from climate change impact. As a representative of the Cambodian National Assembly, we express our deep concern about the impact of loss and damage caused by climate change on community worldwide. We are committed to supporting our government in implementing in the following action. First, implementing operations that respond to the objective of loss and damage fund for COP28 equitably and responsibly addressing all needs related to loss and damage caused by climate impact based on the principle of the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. And second, raising additional funds in the form of grant, not loan, to cover the loss and damage caused by climate impact. Strengthening law by incorporating the principle of polar pay and encouraging effort to mitigate climate impact. Third, introducing policy that ensure the loss and damage fund can meet the need to community in a timely manner, manage which can be confidence and gender responsiveness. Four, currently monitoring the implementation of policy and law to reduce greenhouse gas emission in line with the 1.5 degree Celsius temperature goal. We unite globally with those affected by climate change and will collectively ensure effective operation of the loss and damage fund for COP28, ensuring adequate response to all demand. The Cambodian National Assembly requests that this fund be operational to allow Cambodia to learn, gain experience, and prepare effectively for participation. In conclusion, on behalf of the Cambodian National Assembly and the Third Commission, I extend myself for listening to my remarks and wish Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good health and success in all your endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, His Excellency. I think you covered quite some ground there, and thank you for bringing also viable arguments into the discussions. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Teja Kanika. She's an associate professor in the Energy, Environment and Climate Change program at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, so India. Teja brings really an essential academic and equity perspective to our panel. Let me introduce her by pointing out that she has contributed to key reports and has served on various national and international committees like the IPCC, it was mentioned already. And we are very happy to have you on. We read a lot of your commentary, and it's just so enlightening to see what you're doing in your academic work that is bridging so well to also the practical and governance side of things. Teja, we've discussed the Loss and Damage Fund and the critical needs for financing for loss and damage quite a bit already, but since we felt this conversation needs stronger linkage also to the conversation of just transition, could you inform us, can you bring us a little bit up to speed about your field of expertise? Where is the just transition conversation at the moment? Where's the conversation about equity at the moment?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here in this the forum and with such an august list of speakers, and I'm really privileged to also hear views of colleagues, and I think it's important what has been said so far. I think cannot be underlined further. Let me at the outset give a slight bit of disclaimer. I have not really worked on loss and damage per se. That's not my area of expertise, but I do work on just transitions. And I think it is important that the conversation on just transitions is in fact broadened to include a lot of this, a lot of these aspects of climate change, climate action, which are not necessarily only focused on mitigation. I think there's been a very narrow interpretation of just transitions, and it is important to a certain extent from the context of developed countries, countries that are highly carbonized already. For them, it is a transition from carbonized economies to decarbonized economies. But what of economies that have not been, that are not carbonized or are heavily undercarbonized? We are still in the global south, in large parts of the global south, still seeing transitions to modern access to modern sources of energy. We are still seeing transitions to access to, infrastructure and basic amenities. Schools have to be built, hospitals have to be built, housing has to be provided, roads have to be built. And all of this now has become urgent given the potential impacts of climate change. And those impacts are not due to emissions from developing countries. So we all know that a large majority of those emissions come from developed countries whose historical responsibility it is. And it's not just historical in the sense of, pre-1990, I think it is also continued inaction on the part of developed countries that has resulted in The fact that we have now severely restricted options, the kind of options we would have had in the global south have become severely restricted. The pathways, the flexibility, the possibility of using domestically available resources have become less for developing countries because of historically high emissions of developed countries, but also due to continued inaction on this front for a very, very long time, over 3 decades now of inaction that we have seen from developed countries. So this, I think, is an important context in which we must think about just transitions. It is not simply a question of just transitions in the national context, what just transitions would mean domestically. Why is it that we are having this conversation internationally? Why do we have a just transition work program now? And that is also like very much like the Loss and Damage Fund. It's come out after a long struggle. There is an ongoing struggle to, in fact, broaden the discussion under just transitions. So if you actually look at the decision of the UNFCCC on just transitions, it is not just about workforce, which is an important element of the Just Transitions Work Program. It is important to look at how is it that social security is provided, especially to the section of the workforce that is going to get impacted directly when we have transitioning away or phasing down or phasing out of fossil fuels, whichever term you may want to use. But there is going to be workforce impacts, and it is important to look at that. But there are all kinds of other things. What happens to the even when we think about the workforce, right? What happens to the workforce that is exposed to extreme heat? Or Vietnam is just as you told us is just about to in any time now facing a typhoon, a landfall of a typhoon. So you have what happens to the workforce engaged in both primary, secondary, as well as secondary sectors that is exposed directly to some of these impacts. How does that fit into the just transition conversation? These impacts on the workforce, and more broadly, the workers don't just need jobs, they also need affordable energy, they also need housing, they also need, so there is also it's not just production, but it is also a social reproduction that is important in the classical framework for workers. And so it's not, you can provide, if you say just transitions is about the workforce, is affordable electricity or affordable access to energy not part of a just transition? And that is, I think, an important element of how we must think about the question of just transitions in the global south. And so this, therefore, discussion needs to be broader, and loss and damage is a critical aspect of that. And I think I will be very brief. I know we don't have too much time. So just last 2 minutes referring to what we heard earlier, Richard Sherman talk about, was that this conversation about climate finance we should not forget that that entire fight for the Loss and Damage Fund began with the conversation on reparations, began with compensation. And that is where we must keep emphasizing it, because what we have lost in terms of the fair share of the carbon budget is not recoverable. Unless, of course, you believe that large amounts of carbon dioxide removal through some magical technology is possible, unless that one believes that what is lost is lost. And so by definition, it means that developing countries will not have access to their full share of the carbon budget if we are to limit warming, if we are to limit global warming, which means we will have to take more than we will have to take action that goes beyond our fair share. And in that context, then climate finance, simply as investments, aligned investments, or private finance, doesn't make sense at all, and not just for loss and damage. I think Niti said right at the beginning that the opening panel spoke about how loss and damage has no returns. So, while private finance is available for mitigation. But let us see what has happened in mitigation. It's not as if private finance has delivered even on mitigation, where there are claims that there are returns. Right? So if it cannot deliver even on something like mitigation, it's impossible that it will deliver on adaptation and loss and damage. And so therefore, you definitely need a different way to look at it. And monetizing the lost share of carbon space, what you can no longer realistically recover, and using that as the basis of how this fund is really contributed to or accessed, I think would be really, access of course is a different issue, but at least contributions to the fund can definitely be thought of in this manner. I think it's important that, and I thank you again, I'll stop here and with the opening remarks, and I thank you very much for sort of opening up the discussion on just transitions and in fact making it as broad as it should be. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your thoughtful insights and also your very clear voice. I appreciate that very much. And thank you also for joining us, because as you just said, I mean, loss and damage hasn't always been your focus and your priority, but you can very well draw out where the concept of just transition needs to be broadened. And thank you so much for your insights also about the disproportionate the burdens really that developing countries are facing. I think building on this perspective, I'd like to turn our focus now to the next generation of climate advocates. It's my pleasure actually to introduce Aruba Farouk. Aruba is currently designated as the Adolescent Ambassador for Climate and Health at Bangladesh's Ministry for Health and Family Welfare. She's part of Fridays for Future movement, and she's also the Deputy National Coordinator of YouthNet for Climate Justice Bangladesh, a partner also of FES in Bangladesh. Her involvement in climate action from a very early age on is truly inspiring, and I can just encourage everyone also to read up on her CV. Aruba, as you are involved with YouthNet for Climate Justice in Bangladesh, can you maybe share with us how you already use the objectives and how are you working for YouthNet specifically in regards to the intersections of loss and damage, climate finance, and just transition? Can you share a little bit about how you address those intersections and how YouthNet in general is working in Bangladesh?
Thank you for the awesome introduction. I'm very happy to join you all as a representative of the young generation. To share about our work with YouthNet, I'd like to speak about our project that's named YJust, which is Youth for Just Transition. YJust is a project that's led by the young people in Bangladesh in collaboration with FPAs in Bangladesh. And as part of this project, we have organized community engagement, capacity building, as well as health-led advocacy and policy influencing activities. This project actually involves to empower the communities positively, and overall it emphasizes on establishing a caring economy where communities can live with justice and equity. Moreover, when we see about Bangladesh situation, then the narrative of just transition here is completely different. So it's not only about energy transition here, it is also about empowering the young people. At the same time, sparking a movement, awareness, community level advocacy, and then global diplomacy for us. So that is what we are doing as part of our youth-led Just Transition project with FEAs. We are involved with ground level consultations. At the same time, we are engaging the communities, the young peoples, as well as involved in national level advocacy, and also taking our demands to the global forums such as COP28.
Thank you so much, Aruba, for your sharing. I wanted to address one more question to you, because I think also the policy framework in Bangladesh is quite interesting. 10 years already, well before the UNFCCC proposed the country's prepared national adaptation plans, Bangladesh developed already its own climate change strategy and action plan. Now the policy was updated. The NAP has been published in 2022, and also another climate prosperity plan. As usual, there are multiple frameworks and policies which particularly focus on energy transition, enhancing also the community resilience. This is something that I found very interesting about the Bangladesh policy framework. So can you maybe also quickly address to what extent do you consider this policy framework of Bangladesh also a good practice that other countries could adopt?
Yes, I think so. Thank you for mentioning the updated policies. So first of all, if I just mention the situation in Bangladesh regarding just transition, then I must say, if we look at the ground level impacts of climate change, we see that people are actually being impacted in not a single way, but in a multidimensional way, affecting not only human rights, but also labor rights, children's rights, social security, and such issues. So in that situation, if I come up with an example in the ground when we did our project, surveying how climate change and just transition and loss and damage issues interlinked, we see that many of the most affected people, especially in northern Bangladesh, are using solar panels. But at the same time, those solar panel users are not actually safe. Even after using the solar panels, their houses are half drowned in the water, and they have the solar panel over the roofs. Even we have some solar panel projects, and they are also being impacted by the severe flooding. So we see that just transition is not like energy transition in Bangladesh. It is more connected with prosperity, equity, and justice, at the same time enhancing the community livelihoods further. So pointing on that, we see that we have the National Adaptation Plan. And as part of the National Adaptation Plan, we see that Bangladesh narrative is different about just transition. We see that the way we will achieve climate justice and a better future for the people and the country is actually through adaptation and loss and damage, since we only emit 0.4% of the global carbon emissions. So therefore, so focusing on adaptation is actually very much connected to just transition, since without enhancing the adaptation capabilities, we will not be able to focus on just transition. The second point, the climate prosperity plan, it does not only talks about risk or resilience, but it talks about shifting the risk to resilience and using that resilience to build a prosperous economy. And that is so significant. So just transition is not directly mentioned in our policies, but they clearly refer to a future where our resilience in South Asia is being utilized to become prosperous and move forward as a country, community, and a region, Asia. So overall, I think what the policy frameworks in Bangladesh are quite connect with loss and damage, adaptation, and just transition together. What is really important now is financing. So Bangladesh is going to submit its NDC, Nationally Determined Contributions, by 2025. And we see now that just transition and loss and damage are definitely connected together. There is no way that we forget one or focus on one. So that is why finance is essential. The more when we're financing loss and damage, we must think of just transition at the heart. At the same time, when we are financing and building our work on just transition, we must focus on loss and damage. Overall, I would like to end with saying that that finance is definitely needed, and overall, loss and damage, just transition, and climate justice are definitely in our hearts. And what do young people now want is a caring, safe, and sustainable and climate resilient world for all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot also to you, Aruba. That were really important notions that you now just brought into our discussions. I think especially what you said in the end, but also the notion of shifting risk to resilience. I think this is also something that will stick with us. Thanks a lot. Mentioned by Aruba, but also by Teja, we highlighted already a little bit the needs of workers and their important role within the just transition framework and discussion. Therefore, we are very pleased to now introduce you to Tuti Suvatini, Chair of the International Relations at the Pharmaceutical and Health Workers Union Federation of Indonesia, and which is also part of Industry All, so a global federation representing workers across various sectors. Tuti, we wanted to also have your perspective here to represent really also the perspective of workers. We had an extensive discussion already at this forum on energy transition and on climate finance, and I'd love to hear now your thoughts on how current climate finance mechanisms are actually addressing the needs of workers, especially those in the health sector. Can you share something with us on this matter?
Yes, thank you very much, Francisca. First of all, I would like to thank First Asia and Kenzie for having me in this very important forum. So indeed, just transition is very crucial for us, especially to those who are directly impacted, like workers. So talking about energy transformation and climate finance scheme related to workers, I have several things in mind. So the first one is from the perspective of the global South countries, climate finance should be a debt that must be paid by global North countries and their corporation, which have been the largest polluters and emitters historically since the industrialization era. In addition, in the colonial era, northern countries have exploited the resources of southern countries and generated significant wealth and emission. So funding scheme must be based on historical responsibility and provide fair compensation to countries in the south. In this case, developed countries that have more capacity must carry out the decarbonization and at the same time provide fundings to increase the capabilities of developing countries. The second thing is I would like to share about the Indonesian government views climate finance as a crucial aspect in tackling climate change and achieving Indonesia's commitment in the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gases. In the context of energy transition in Indonesia, funding flows not only through the Just Transition Energy Partnership project, but also includes in the Energy Transition Mechanism and CIF on accelerating coal transition, which are essentially for the interest of the funders. Financing these two schemes is facilitated by international financial institutions, and most of the financing is the form of foreign debt. So the JTFA program in Indonesia has become a green structural adjustment trap, which is similar to the scheme that was imposed by international financial institutions in 80s and 90s, whose damage was long-lasting. So the funding was obtained from the International Partner Group, which promised Indonesia to fund energy transition project and was guided by the Comprehensive Investment and Policy Plan, which was launched in 2023. However, energy transition financing in CIPP JTFA is dominated by debt. The debt-based financing model, both in the form of soft loan and commercial loan, raised concern about the burden of JTP funding on Indonesia's fiscal space. So the business behind this project requires the JTP finance project be tied to energy sector privatization agenda. These schemes are actually not for the profit of Indonesian citizens, but only for the funders. If the energy sector is privatized, it will be doomed not only for workers, but also for all Indonesian citizens, because the electricity price will be skyrocket. So maybe we have to start to think the alternative scheme on the climate finance than that JTP offer. The third thing that we trade union urge the government to draw a specific roadmap on climate finance and just transition. Maybe the government need to have an exact data, for example, on how many workers impacted, how many family members they have, in what industries, which region. So they have what the plan of the training, retraining, or skilling, upskilling, which ministries are responsible for this, and the compensation on loss and damage that workers experience, etc., etc. There must be enough fund, and the fund must not come from the foreign debt, but it must be included in the government budget planning. That's over to you, Francisca.
Thank you so much, Tuti, for your sharing. Can you actually see any projects within the JTP in Indonesia that are targeting to health workers? Is there something in there for the workers, really?
Yeah. Actually, the JTP in Indonesia, they the JTP Indonesia is at the first stage. They trying to include trade union to participate, but after a few activities on the launch of their CIPP document, what we try to give some input concerning the workers. They don't even accommodate one word from our side. So they look like accommodate us, but it's just in the surface. They want us to participate, by our participation is meaningless.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but very insightful. Thank you so much, Tuti, also for sharing this. Actually, within one of the former labs, we've also had a little bit of an insight to the JTP that was signed in Vietnam, and how also there the just part is a little bit limited at the moment. So at least you're not alone. But I think also there, I think it's a great opportunity here to connect and to share notes, and maybe to come up with a better roadmap of how to also make the voices of civil society more vocal. Now we have the chance to interact a little bit more. I can receive questions from the audience, so please put it also in the chat box. But I would also like to give the floor back to Richard and give him the chance to react to everything that has been said so far. So Richard, you're on again.
Thank you very much, Francisca, and thank you to colleagues for those inputs. There's one thing that I did forget is very important, is also to, in case colleagues are not aware, President Marcos of the Philippines signed into law last week, the state bill granting the Loss and Damage Fund board its legal personality. So again, in record time, demonstrating the leadership, the continued leadership of the Philippines and the Southeast Asia region on dealing with loss and damage. So what that means is that we are an international body with legal standing in the Philippines, which means we can sign the agreements with the World Bank. We have legal personality, which allows us to contract and to do our business. I think this has happened in 6 months since Dubai, and even less time if you think about we only took the decision to select the Philippines as the host of the board in June. So remarkable speed that we're working at. So let me just again reiterate the comment about the notion of reparations and compensation. This is going to be a critical piece of work. We are having some conversations with work that Harjit is doing around reparations and compensation. It is a politically charged set of terms, but we shouldn't necessarily be guided by the politics of the world. The reality is as such that has been described. Not only are we constrained in our lack of ability to use the global carbon space, but essentially people are the damages that are being felt, right? And I don't think yet that we have articulated how we can resolve this issue. It gets stuck in the politics. So this is going to be, in my mind, a critical piece of work, because in some cases, for some countries, there is no option but to suffer loss and damage events. There's simply no, it's not that they have a choice. It's just that's the context, that adaptation is no longer possible. And there's a really important component here about workers and the impact on the economy. So what, are we going to be paying or compensating, for that matter, economies that no longer can operate? So when the tourism industries in Maldives, or the fishing industries, right, they cannot fish anymore, they cannot create revenues from tourism. Do we pay for that? Should we pay for that? What happens when coffee farmers in Costa Rica can't grow coffee? Do we support them to diversify their economies, to create new jobs? I think we have there's so much that we haven't even begun to unpack with the loss and damage discussion, because politically we've been fighting for the recognition. Now that we have the recognition, we need to urgently focus on what it is that we're actually doing beyond the obvious, coming in to support countries after disasters. But it's really the slow onset events that are permanent and irreversible. That is also where we need to focus on. This brings in the issue of workers. It also brings in the issue of young people and the youth constituencies, and we need to engage further with them. The issue of planning, I raised it. Our colleague also from the youth also raised it. But we have to sort of be balanced in our approach. We can't be caught in a planning cycle. If you look at the implementation of NAPs, I mean, I think only 52 countries have submitted NAPs. This has been on our political agenda at the multilateral level for well over 20 years. And so we can't afford to be caught into further planning. It's necessary, but we have to do implementation. So thank you all to the speakers that have given us further insights, and happy to continue discussions. Newton, we will rely on you to figure out a way to continue to engage people. So thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And yeah, I mean, it's great to hear that also you're eager to broaden the discussion on loss and damage, and that you're happy also to include young people, trade unions, all parts of civil society. I think this will be also a good way to break through to some of the hurdles that you just mentioned. I would like to give the floor back to Tayal. She would like to, I think, comment on the Just Energy Transition partnerships again. I think this is also a very interesting part of our conversation here, as the JETPs, as they are being called, have been welcomed at first for their new approach in dispersing climate finance. But now, as we've seen the implementation in South Africa, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, we can also see that not everything is running as smoothly, and there are also some severe hurdles involved. So Tia, I'm very excited to hear also your take on the jet piece. The floor is yours again.
Thank you very much, and fantastic conversation. I couldn't help myself. I had to come in on the jet piece, and I really do think that it is really a misnomer to call it a just energy transition partnership. It is anything but just. I think our colleague from Indonesia said it very clearly that you have basically what we are seeing is structural adjustment through the back door, if not directly through the front door in some of these JETPs. And this is precisely the issue with climate finance, right? When you use such a broad term, developed countries have consistently opposed any multilaterally agreed definition of climate finance. So what you have through the JETPs is basically private. So a large component of it is loans. Part of it is concessional loans, but otherwise it's also a large proportion is commercial loans. A very small component is grants. And in fact, reskilling workers, etc., there's only sort of language about it, but there are no specific targets on any of the components that actually really link to people directly. The only targets you have across all the JETPs that have been put on paper, South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc., you have basically the targets are only for mitigation, for phasing out of coal or other fossil fuels, for expanding renewable energy targets. And these are above and beyond, except for, I think, in the case of Vietnam, these are above and beyond what the countries themselves deem feasible in their context. So they go beyond the NDCs, what the NDCs have promised. And they're conditional. So it's donor-driven agendas of mitigation that are being put together through the JETPs in the context of it. So it's some of us, at least, watching it from the outside, have been extremely skeptical about these, even when they were established, because sort of this route to climate financing, given the history that we have of financing for development projects as well, especially in the era of structural adjustment, it's been JETPs is just an extension of that. I think that is very clear. So if we are really to talk about climate finance, adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage, all of these components in the context of just transitions, then we have to talk about what we mean by justice. It's global equity. I think, Aruba also said this very clearly. It is equity, both in the global sense, in the national sense as well. But what you have as the possibility of achieving equity in the national sense is severely constrained by the fact that globally you have a shrinking space. So is it possible for you to be able to provide safe drinking water and universal access to sanitation if you have no access to energy that is possible? Is it possible to do this only through renewable energy sources? And even if you do it through renewable energy sources, as Aruba said, you cannot protect this infrastructure from getting flooded because those who are supposed to do more mitigation are not doing anything. So this is unavoidable impact. So I think, JETPs, I mean, any sort of congratulatory or celebratory view of that, not just now, but right from the beginning, I think I have been sort of severely skeptical of, and it's been proven definitely across the experience of all countries that it is extremely problematic. So it's time to reinvent or rethink and redraft what we want in terms of, even if we want bilateral partnerships and agreements, what is it that we want to see in them? And it's definitely something that has to be different than the current structure of the JETPs. Thanks.
Thanks again for a very clear statement. And I would just like to point out that actually in our Just Transition Forum 2023, so last year we focused on the JETP. So if that's something also our participants are interested in, then please also go back to our website, find the report and find the recordings from last year. I think there were also some very insightful discussions about the implementation, about the restrictions, about JETP. Well, now, as we are wrapping up the closing panel, I would like to highlight and thank really everyone again who has been involved in this panel. I think we managed to showcase again the many aspects that are important to us, that we found so integrate also to this broad discussion about just transition. We hope that we provided a platform where your work on just transition, wherever it comes from, wherever it stems from, whether it's focused on policy, on finance, on grassroots action. I hope you found something that was interesting to you, that sparked your interest, that sparked also your energy again to get climate action on the ground. I will now hand over to our dear partner again, to Niti, to really guide us through the final reflections and the official closing of the Just Transition Forum 2024.
Thanks, Franziska, and what a fascinating discussion. So broad-based and yet so targeted and focused. So that was a pleasure listening to all the very eminent and experienced speakers. So we have just come to the end on 3 days, 3 exciting days of intense discussion on loss and damage and on just transition. It is wonderful to be able to offer this platform, Just Transition Forum Asia, where we gather leading experts from across the world who provide multi-stakeholder perspectives on just transition and loss and damage. The labs also, the 10 labs we held, also provided an opportunity for practitioners doing real work on the ground on implementing just transition to share the experience. The response this year, more than 600 registrants from more than 48 countries across our 12 events this year, shows the demand for this platform. It is also a symbol of the growing just transition community in Asia in particular and beyond. In this regard, I congratulate Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, FES, for its initiative and leadership on the Just Transition Forum Asia, now in its 4th year, in collaboration with CANC. Because of the significance of this year's theme, Loss and Damage Fund, which has a direct link to COP29 negotiations in Baku in November, JTFA will explore monitoring the issue at COP29 and report on how many of the aspirations of our panelists will be realized there. So that's something exciting we look forward to. Anyway, as all good things have to come to an end, it is now my role and privilege to provide a vote of thanks to everyone on behalf of FES and CANC to who has contributed to making this event a success. Firstly, to every organization and individual who helped to publicize and promote the Just Transition Forum within your network. Thanks to all the organizations that hosted the labs and brought in a highly respected panel of speakers with great experience and expertise. All you participants who registered for JTFA this year and took time off your busy schedules to attend some of the 12 events. Supporters from CANC and FES, with a special mention of some of the dream team who made this event so flawless and seamless for participants. They include Max, Candy, Fuong, led by the dynamic duo of Vin and Franziska. It's been an absolute pleasure collaborating and engaging with all of you. And I look forward to JTFA 2025. And of course, one of the persons to thank is our MC Siege, to whom I will now hand over to Edgen, Just Transition Forum Asia 2024. Over to you, Siege.
Thank you so much, Niti. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting for you the past few days and really hearing the passion that so many people have as we work towards this incredible challenge of our times in achieving a just transition. So Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists for that enriching discussion. Before I let you go, let's take a group photo. So our colleague Fong will be helping us take a group photo. Fong?
Thank you.